Alrighty, so all of my colors are now mixed, at least all the basic foundation colors, and I am now ready to start applying them to the painting. So what I did was create an underpainting, a monochromatic underpainting with some burnt umber, just as I always do. Sometimes I use burnt sienna, and currently I'm placing down some solvent-free gel from Gamblin onto my palette. This is going to be my medium. I really didn't use anything else. This is like a really slippery, buttery kind of medium, and you can just use that alone in your paintings if you wanted to. So I went ahead with that. And I'm starting with the first shadow color I created, this warm shadow color, so I'm just going to lay that down. And the beauty of having all these colors premixed like this is that you can just start applying them where they are supposed to go. You already kind of figure that out as you were mixing these colors and figuring out where to put them. You have that in your memory, so you don't have to start from scratch when it comes to the colors. Your foundation's already built upon, so the only thing you really do at this point is just place those colors where they're supposed to go or where you see them going based on your reference. So in this case, I'm just adding a little bit of solvent-free gel to my brush, and that helps the paint apply more smoothly, more easily, and just placing them in those shadow parts where I saw them. Yeah, so let's say that you were starting out with a brush right at this point. You would now be figuring out all your colors. I just dropped my brush in my medium. So you would be starting from scratch essentially, and you would have to mix all your colors as you paint, which, I think ultimately you don't really save that much time if you do it ahead of time, but it definitely makes it a lot more fun to start with the colors, and it makes it less intimidating because that color foundation is already built for you. So it's just a matter of preference, really. Sometimes I pre-mix my colors, sometimes I mix them as I go with my brush, but even with my pre-mixed colors that I have there, I still alter them slightly with the colors, all the basics that I have straight from the tube right above them. And because honestly, those are just your foundation colors. They're not meant to be like the only colors you use in your painting. They're just all the basic color blocks or color groups that I saw and wanted to lay down, so I had them. Now, as you'll see further into this painting in the future editions of this demonstration, that palette is going to turn into total chaos. That's kind of just what happens as I'm working. All the colors get mixed up and intertwined, and then once I get into the details, they just turn completely crazy. Like it just turns into chaos, which is fun to see. So yeah, now I'm taking that slightly grayish shadow and I'm applying it to that part of the jaw where there could have been like a very soft light reflecting off of the wall. It might have been the light source that's directly illuminating the model from the right side. It could be reflecting off something that's off to the left. So that very slight grayish color is what I'm painting. And now I'm painting that center point on her cheekbone where the two light sources kind of disappear, and that dark shadow in between the two lights, the harsh, more bright light coming from the right, and then the very soft, subtle, I'm assuming wall reflection coming from the left, and then that dark point is like a gradient where they transition from one to the other, or one disappears, there's that dark point, and then the other begins. So that is incredibly important for giving the face dimension and making it look real. I noticed that once I started paying attention to all of those very subtle, soft gradients within shadows and, soft little light sources and just shadows within shadows, those are all such important elements to a painting that really make a difference in how realistic it looks. So now going back to a slightly warmer brown shadow color, and this one is for the lighter parts, still shadowy, but more closer to the light source. not quite as dark as the darkest parts of the shadows. So this part's going into the brow bones, some parts of her forehead, her nose, her chin, and just it's another one of the, I guess, transitional colors from the super dark shadows into the highlight parts. I think it's also important to remember that when you're painting, you're always painting light. You know, the reason you're able to see anything in the world is because light is reflecting off of it. It's good to pay attention to how light works, how it bounces off of objects and reflects off of things, and over time it just becomes easier. You start to pick up on things, you get used to it. So as you can see there, I took that pinkish color and I mixed it in with that warm transitional shadow color, and I just kind of softly combined them just once again to create that transition, and I'm sort of blending it a little bit on the actual painting on the canvas paper, which, I mean, you don't have to do that. I just prefer to. I like to blend as I paint. Some people would argue, oh, you don't do that, it's too much, but you know, it's really all about what you enjoy, what gives you the best results for you. And yeah, there's just so many ways to approach this. This is just one way, it's just my way, and one of my ways, honestly, because I paint in many different ways. So going back to that warm color, I'm just kind of just laying down the foundation colors. So I'm trying to get as much underpainting covered on the face as possible because that will give me another foundation to build upon when it comes to details and layering and just making this piece look more real. So now going back to a slightly darker shadow color, and for some of the darker shadows on the nose, farthest from the light source. So I'm speeding this one up here by double the speed. So just so we can get through this a little bit faster here, I always find the initial color blocking stage a little bit boring. My favorite part is always the details. I love it when I already have that foundation down and all I have to do is just perfect things. Well, not really perfect, but you know what I mean. Just build up all the details. So right now I'm just trying to get through this extremely awkward phase where things just look super strange, and I'm just kind of breaking into all of those colors that I mixed. So now I'm painting on the eyebrows. So some of the colors that I mixed, like I didn't mix colors for the eyebrows, but some of the colors that I already had actually were a great fit for the eyes, and other small details and shadows that were not necessarily significant in like a large area of the painting for me to warrant mixing a whole bunch of paint for it. But with the colors that I did mix, all the general colors, I had enough to kind of have some for everything. And of course, if there's something that I didn't quite have the right color for example, like later on, the whites in the eyes, I just pretty much used, you know, titanium white, burnt umber, a little bit of ultramarine blue, because the whites in the eyes are never just plain white, ever. Like, don't ever do that. Your subject is going to look like a scary robot. And yeah, so I'm just trying to work in the shapes on the face. Right now I'm moving on to some of the lighter colors where the highlight is, kind of combining it with that darker shadow color for underneath the eyes. And I actually painted on her eyes a little bit too small here in the underpainting. So further on into the painting, once I'd already begun doing details like way into that, I did end up enlarging her eyes just a teeny little bit. But, you know, these are all little flaws that you fix and correct over time. So at the moment, they are a little bit small for the eyes that she's supposed to have. But overall, I think you guys pretty much get the idea of how I approached this painting between, you know, mixing all the colors and starting out this color blocking phase. I didn't bother to include my underpainting phase because honestly, you guys have seen me do that so many times. You already know, you get the idea. So for the eyes, I actually used some of the colors I had for the shadows, like the more gray shadows, as well as the hair. So yeah, it ended up working out. Like the colors fit almost perfectly. So that was interesting. Um, and in general, as long as you get, all your major color groups, it should be um, easy to figure out and go from there when it comes to smaller details like eyes and, eyebrows or little jewels or whatever is on your subject that doesn't necessarily consume a huge portion of the overall painting. Because when you premix colors, there is a risk of course, wasting some of the paint, which, happens inevitably whether you mix your colors or not. But I feel like if you are new to mixing colors, you don't want to pick up too large of a blob of paint. You kind of want to take your time with it and just build on those colors gradually, little by little, because I've definitely had my moments where I mix these ginormous blobs of paint. I couldn't quite get the right color, and I would just pick up just all this huge amount of paint, and then I didn't even end up using half of the blob of paint. So, yeah, just try and be a little cautious with it. And when mixing colors, don't just take a huge amount at a time, just start really slow. And of course, you don't necessarily have to pre-mix all your colors. You can absolutely just go ahead and start mixing with your brush with the colors you have out of the tube. It just depends on what pace you're going for. So for me, I always have like a little bit of an anxiety when it comes to starting a new painting with color because it's just empty. There's really not much going on besides the underpainting, and you just have to start from ground zero. And I just love having all of that already planned out for me. Like I already did the anxiety, like annoying stuff for myself. I took care of that. Now I can just like kind of continue with the things I really, really enjoy about painting. So it's actually really great to do this for larger pieces. So for my solo show, oh, here we go. Okay, so I'm mixing a little bit of ultramarine blue, titanium white, and some of the browns. And yeah, that's going in for the sclera in the eye, the whites of the eyes. But yeah, for my solo show back in 2017, I pre-mixed pretty much all the colors for every single painting, and I actually saved a good amount of time, and I was able to just blast through the painting so much faster because all my colors were already there for me. Maybe I spent like an hour mixing all those colors, but at least I just, all I had to do was then just put them on the canvas. So it's a great way to work once you kind of get the hang of mixing and how color theory works. I have a confession. I never actually like studied color theory. I don't use color wheels. It is very intuitive for me. I just, it makes sense. Like I know how colors work, so it's not that big of a deal, I guess. And I don't find color wheels helpful to me. I don't know. Um, I just think as long as you practice and you're physically in the paint, you can't possibly learn without messing up, without making mistakes. And don't feel bad if you do. But that's how I learned. So hopefully that helps. So now I'm painting on some of the shadows in the eyelids, sort of like in the crease of the eye, the brow bone, and some of the shadows underneath the eye. Just some of the shadows there under the eyebrow. Something else I'm noticing is I'm now losing the first layer. It's turning more matte versus glossy. So I actually left this piece for a little while and came back to it, and it was that whole dark shadow part was completely matted, and the color, the values were so off. So I just applied a very, very tiny layer of solvent-free gel, which you'll see later on, and that actually helped a lot. So love that solvent-free gel. It is a wonderful medium, and I use it on occasion, but I've never actually tried using it for like a whole painting. I would just use it for most of the top layers, not so much the beginning. But it was great. For small pieces, I think it's fantastic, and it's not as intimidating. You don't have to worry about, mixing something, and my layers weren't super intense here, so I wasn't super worried about fat over lean. And from my understanding, I'm pretty sure the solvent-free gel is flexible, much like your alkyd resins are, so it's not that huge of a deal. Um, and honestly, with my consecutive layers to come, I end up using more medium anyway, so it works out. So even though I'm not like consciously stressing out and trying to follow fat over lean, I end up accidentally following it anyway, just by the nature of how I paint and how I use mediums. And I always end up using more mediums towards my detail parts because those paint layers tend to be a little bit more transparent, where I'm doing a little bit more glazing, not so much layering on heavy, thick, opaque layers the way I am for the very first foundation color blocking layer. So now picking up the darkest color that I mixed, or one of the darkest shadow colors, I'm working on the nose, so the nostrils, and the darkest shadow on the side of the nostril to the left there. It's like a very deep, intense, harsh shadow from the light source. I'm adding a little bit of alizarin crimson to it to warm it up because the color I had was a little bit too warm, or too cold, sorry, which is something I did frequently throughout this piece as my foundation colors that I premixed were becoming intertwined. I would, like I said, tweak them, add little bits of whatever colors I had out of the tube. So if I needed to warm something up for a small section of the painting because the general color wasn't super duper accurate for that specific part, I would just add, a little bit of alizarin crimson, a little bit of cadmium red light. It depends on what value I'm going for. If I need something to be much redder or just, a slightly warmer shadow, I would just go with the alizarin crimson. It's transparent. That way I'm not altering the value. I'm just warming up a shadow. So that's kind of one way you can figure out how to work with opaque and transparent colors. And again, it's just really all about experimenting. Once you paint lots of times and you become accustomed to it, you start to become familiar and it becomes like second nature. You just know what colors do what and how to use them. So it's really all just a matter of practicing a ton. So going back to the eyes again, you'll notice that when I paint, I always switch my focus around, and if you've been watching these demonstrations for a while, you'll see this in action. I'm always switching my focus around. I'm always going from one end of the painting to another, and then I'll come back to what I originally started, and that's just my attention span. Like, I really cannot focus on one part for too long. I always have to switch and then come back. And it's the same with paintings in general. I always have to leave a painting for a few days or a few weeks, sometimes even months, and then come back to it. So now I'm going back to the eyes. I'm just kind of intensifying them and just shaping, I guess, the outline, some of the eyelashes, and just trying to get them to look more 3D. And you can see that the eye on the right is a little bit too small and a little bit too closed, but eventually I did correct that. So it's just a matter of trusting myself and being patient. I will also say that the whites in the eyes are a little bit too bright looking for me, and eventually in the piece I did fix that, but again, this is just the first color layer. It's the foundation that I'm setting down, which I can build upon, and I can push that detail as far as I want it, or as far as I'm capable of, or, as far as I have the patience for, which is typically the case. Because if it really wasn't a matter of patience, I would never get anything done because I'd be stuck on the same painting, just reworking details over and over and over again until I kill the painting and make it so much worse. So it's kind of a good thing that I have a crazy sporadic attention span because it allows me to move on and not get too stuck and too caught up on things. So going back to that warm kind of like mid-tone shadow in the nose. We had a bunch of yellow ochre in there, and I'm just kind of once again going back and forth between the eyes and the nose and just switching out my colors, going into the warm mid-tone color that's on the very bottom of the palette, the first color I mixed, and then some of the highlight color, and just trying to sculpt the face to look real. I also feel like with demonstrations like this specific one where I pre-mix the colors, it's pretty self-explanatory. There's really not all that much to say. It's all right in front of you because all the explaining, I guess, happened during the color mixing process. So now that all of that is ready and it's kind of like, I mean, I hate when people say paint by number, but it's a similar feeling, minus the numbers, you know? You already have all your colors. Granted, they're not mixed for you like paint by number, but, you know, it's like solving a puzzle. And essentially the way I see it is you are taking something that you see in the physical world, you are processing it through your body, through your eyes and your mind, through your hands, and you're translating what you're seeing or what you're feeling into the paint and then onto the canvas. So to me, like, it really bothers me when people say stuff like, oh, it's realism. Real artists only just paint from their imaginations. It's like, wow, thank you for showing us how arrogant you are. Sorry, guys. I have to vent sometimes. But there's so many annoying misconceptions about art that I'm constantly hearing, and it's really a minority. Like, as far as like when I come across it, it's really not that common for me. Uh, but you know, my friends get similar types of comments and messages, and I just, I don't know. I don't see a purpose to like go around and be negative to people. Like if you like to create more illustrative art, more fantasy based, like do that. If you like to create abstract and not make it look real, then do that. And if you like to portray realism, reality, and details, then have fun. Nobody has the right to police your method. So do what makes you happy. And this is what makes me happy. So again, going back to the eyes, I constantly kept reworking the shadows on the eyelids and just in the brow bone and in general, like the crease. I was having a hard time getting it to look right. Couldn't figure out if it's because I painted the eye shape wrong or if they were too small or if I just had the wrong color for the crease. That was a bit of a challenge to figure out and establish that. And then going back to the nose and some of the shadows under the eye on that right side there. And then going back to the whites of the eyes. And I put in little sparkle dots just to, you know, give some more life to the subject, which I paint over it completely, but I just needed to put those tiny little highlight dots on there because that brought the figure more to life to me, and you know, it gives soul to a painting. I feel like once you add those little sparkles in the eyes, it makes such a huge difference, and you've gone from like a zombie to a live person. Hopefully that makes sense. So once again, I'm just reworking the eyes. I'm just gonna speed this up a little bit here so we can just fly through some of this boring stuff. But you pretty much get the idea. I'm just taking little bits of paint from the colors I already mixed, and because I remember where they were intended and what purpose I had for them, I'm just putting them in their rightful places. And if there's something that I find maybe I didn't mix that specific color for that area, but a lot of times I'll notice that fits elsewhere, so I'll do that. Like I said, I mixed the colors for the hair and I ended up using them for the eyes along with some of the shadow colors, so it all just ends up working out. And then once again, going back to some of those shadows on the face, some of the mid-tones, those really warm colors I mixed with lots of yellow ochre, that beautiful color for some of the shadows that are closer in the light source. And then it was time to paint the lips and just kind of get this empty jaw and chin and mouth covered up so that our figure looks even more alive. And so, yeah, I'm just, once again, the colors I mixed for the lips, I just kind of place them where I see them. Not trying to make it perfect right off the bat because I knew I was going to rework them later on, but I did want to at least place something down so the area was covered so the canvas wasn't blank anymore, and just kind of just blast through it. Yeah, and you'll see later on in the piece I did end up reworking the lips quite a bit, but in this case I just had the colors I mixed with my alizarin crimson, titanium white, and cadmium red light, just varying amounts of that. So I'm just trying to get that covered and then paint the chin and then move onward. Alrighty, so the early stages of the lips are done. Again, it's just going to be reworked a bunch. I'm just now moving on to the chin. And once again, using the colors that I planned out for them, I'm using a really dark shadow for the shadow that's directly under the lip. It's just like a very faint, like line almost. It fades into the other colors, the lighter browns. I can't speak right now. I'm getting tongue-tied. So here you can see that shadow on the left is really starting to turn like a light blue, and that's because the paint is starting to kind of sink into the surface, and that's when you need to do something called oiling out, or just apply a thick glossy layer of paint, in which case that's what I did. So you can see just how like weird that shadow on the left looks. Meanwhile, all these fresh colors I'm laying down look super vibrant and glossy and just rich colors. But they will eventually fade a little bit because as it dries, it loses its gloss and then it's reflecting light differently. So oiling out is a method that you can use. So I'm painting the lighter part, like the little highlight on the chin there, with the highlight colors I created, just in varying amounts. I'm just kind of adding them in here and there, back to the forehead and on the cheeks, on the underside of the eyes, which, if you look at the reference, you can see exactly what I'm going off of and what I'm trying to portray. And now going to some of the warmer tones, there's a bit of a warmth to her cheeks. She had like some rosy cheeks, so I brought in some alizarin crimsons into those browns, and I wanted to just warm them up a little, make the skin tones look more alive. And the forehead also looks a little bit matted and not as vibrant, but that's okay. So just kind of sculpting here. I like to just, it feels that way, so I like to describe it as such. You're not literally sculpting, but it kind of seems like it. Yeah, once again, just switching my focus around throughout the painting, and now I'm going back to some of those shadows, gradually making my way to the left part of the painting. I'm trying to blend them in and revitalize those dull colors that just turned really sad. So I'm painting that warm transitional color between the super dark part of the cheekbone and just that diagonal across her face, from her cheekbone to her chin, from the angle at which the light sort of illuminates that side of her face and casts the shadow on the cheekbone and also on the nose. So there's like a really warm color, and it's in the middle of my palette, which you guys saw me and where I held up my palette knife to compare that color. And you can see I added other colors to it. I made like a lighter version, a slightly warmer version, and yeah, all those subtle gradients are what make a massive difference. That is something that I always try to pay attention to, is all the soft details, like those the very subtle changes in colors, and those gradients are pretty much everywhere, and they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and it's something that's really important to pay attention to if you are aiming to make your work look super realistic. So you can see that my painting process is very much a slow, gradual building process. I do not work on one area and perfect it and then move on to the next. You know, I kind of loosely just work on the general face, and then once I'm okay with it, I'll move on to the rest of the painting, but I don't start with details right off the bat. That is something that I save for last. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's so many different ways to paint. This is just how I'm naturally drawn to creating, how I naturally paint. So going to that dark shadow color, I'm now re-intensifying that diagonal shadow that the two sources of light meet, or kind of don't meet. So it looks super dark right now, but do not fear. I'm going to brighten it up and blend it with the warm browns and some of that bluish grayish color that I mixed for that reflection in the shadows of that, like I said, I thought was a wall. So I just brought in a little bit of yellow ochre and ultramarine blue on a separate color of its own. Very, very small amount on my brush. I'm just sort of tinting that dark shadow to make it slightly green, because if you remember, as I was mixing, I did say that I'm seeing a little bit of green there. So I just wanted to intensify that ever so slightly. I did not want to use cadmium lemon because it's way too bright, way too opaque, and the yellow ochre was a more muted, like earthy yellow, and combined with the ultramarine blue and burnt umber, it wouldn't have created a crazy bright neon green. So yeah, that's really why I love yellow ochre so much, is because it's just a beautiful earthy color that's so versatile, and you can use it for so many things like skin tones and nature, flower, like all sorts of stuff. So here we go. I am painting on that subtle shadow on the jaw and just kind of blending that in with those warm tones and the super dark shadow. We're actually starting to look a little bit more real here. And this is all basically one sitting of the painting. So here you can see I started a little bit on the neck. I'm going back to the highlights now. And I'm just going to put some highlights on the lips. I guess I decided to go back to that. They were a little bit too flat the way I painted them, so I went back to the lips and above the lip. So this batch right here is pretty much the last of the painting. I'm just doing a few final touch-ups, and I was planning on coming back to it the next day, but I got so caught up in another aspect of my work, so I actually ended up leaving the painting for a few days, and then the colors that I pre-mixed actually dried up. Not entirely. There was, you know, just the surface of them. So they were still soft and you could poke through and squish paint out. So it's not like I wasted a ton of paint, because I really didn't. It was the very, very thin film of paint that dried at the surface, which is fine because it actually keeps the paint underneath it wet longer, so it works out. So yeah, a few days after I originally mixed the colors, some of them did dry up a little bit, so you'll see it's not that hard to just kind of poke through. So here I'm using varying amounts of cadmium red light and yellow ochre, mostly cadmium red light and alizarin crimson, to add some warmth and dimension to the lips, because there are varying tones of reds in the lipstick she was wearing and the way the light sort of reflected off of it. So there was some little bits of purples, some deeper reds, some soft, like a peachy color. So it was very interesting. Lots of shape and color variety there. So yeah, just kind of trying to get that down, trying to make her lips look a little bit more real, more alive, with more dimension. And after this point is when I just kind of left the painting alone and decided to come back to it in a few days, which you will see here shortly. And I'll also show you guys how I poked through my palette to make it workable again. which is something that I tend to do a lot because, like I said, I never finish my paintings in one sitting. Like, it is so incredibly rare for me to do that. And in the case that I have pre-mixed colors, yeah, sometimes they might end up drying up. And again, not a problem. Just poke right on through and squish the paint out with your palette knife and it'll be usable again. And same thing with palettes when, I mean, if you've seen this in some of my previous demos if you've been around a while, but the paint I have that's squished out of the tube also tends to dry up, and I will also poke that and squish the paint out because I don't want to waste paint. So if there's even just a slight dry film on top of it, like, I'm gonna salvage what I can, okay? So as you can see here, I've just been using little bits of cadmium, red light, and alizarin crimson, and just trying to build on the lips here. And at this point is when the footage is going to cut out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this demonstration was a little bit helpful for you. There's going to be more to come, and I'm also going to have another skin tones demonstration for lighter tones as well, and there will be more parts to this portrait. So thank you guys. I will see you in the next one. Bye!